Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today we're going to make curved moldings, a skill that will take your woodworking projects to another level. Have you ever looked at a clock or a fancy cabinet and wondered how they made those curved moldings? I used to. In fact, a lot of woodworkers avoid projects that they really want to make simply because they're afraid of the curved moldings. Hopefully this video will change all that, because I think you'll see that the process isn't all that difficult. Curved moldings aren't cut straight and then bent. The profile is routed into the curved edge of wider workpieces, and then the molding is simply trimmed away. It is a little more complex than that, but I'll walk you through it. We'll begin with the outer curve. You've likely already made a template for your project, whether it's a cabinet or whatever you're making, so that you could make the maybe top and bottom panel so they match exactly. If you've not made a template that has the curve you want on it, you're going to have to make one. So for example, if you've got a cabinet, you'll take either your top or your bottom panel and you'll attach it to a piece of, say, 1/4 inch MDF with some double-sided tape, and then use a flush trim bit to trace that curve on it. Now you've got a master template, and we're going to use this to make our molding. First, I attach the master template with double-sided tape to the top of my molding stock. Notice I'm using wood that's as wide as the entire curve of the molding and then some. I rough cut the shape on the bandsaw, getting as close to the edge of my template as possible without cutting into it. Then I use a flush trim bit on my router to finish it up. After my curves are established, I can remove the template and use a profiled router bit to cut the shape I want into the curved edge. Here's a quick tip about safely using bearing-guided router bits on a router table without a fence. When I use a template, I make it about 1 inch longer than the workpiece on each end. That overhang makes it easier to start and stop the cut without the bit catching on the corner of a workpiece. If I'm not using a template, I install a starting pin, which threads into a hole in the top of my router plate. I can then use that to lever the workpiece off the pin and into the bit, which gives me a lot more control, especially at the beginning of the cut. I'm making this molding in 2 parts, with 2 different router bits. By creating moldings in 2 or more layers, you can make complex profiles with simple router bits. In fact, we made a video about creating layered moldings for the January 2017 issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. I'll put a link to that in the notes below this video. Creating a layered, curved molding does complicate the process of trimming these profiles away from the wider boards that they were cut on. Because they're stacked, the bottom layer has to be trimmed off wider than the top layer. So I usually just stack my work pieces like I want them, and then I mark where I'm going to trim them. But I'm not going to just take these pieces over to the bandsaw and trim them. The curve of the back is critical. It has to match the curvature of your cabinet perfectly, or it's not going to attach properly. To match it to my cabinet, I need to make a negative template, one that's opposite the shape of my master template. We recently created a video about that process too, which will be in the October 2017 issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. I'll link to that one too in the notes below in case you want to watch it to get all the details. But for now, I'm just going to do a quick review of the process. I attach my master template to another wider piece of template material, and I use a 1/4 inch flush trim bit to cut a curve through the center. I keep the bearing of the bit tight up against my master template on top as I cut. Then I take the offcut and I attach it to another piece of template material. I change the bearing on my 1/4 inch flush trim bit to a 3/4 inch wide bearing, and I use it to trace the shape of that upper layer. When I'm done, I pull off the upper layer and I throw it away. The lower layer is now an exact copy or negative match to your master template. The reason why we went to all those steps is better explained in that video I mentioned, so check it out at that link below when you get a chance. Now I'm going to use this negative template to trim my moldings from the larger workpieces. I've already marked how wide I want them as I trim them off, so I'm going to use double-sided tape to attach my negative template to the underside of each workpiece, because that underside has more surface area. The other side that the profile's routed on has less room for you to put that double-sided tape. Now I go over to the bandsaw and I trim away most of my way, staying about 1/16 of an inch from my template. As I take it to the router table, I'm going to need some help to support it, or the whole thing's going to tip over as I cut. So I take a couple of the scraps that I trimmed away at the bandsaw, and I use double-sided tape to attach those to the underside of my template. Now I can use a flush trim router bit to finish removing the waste. I always take an extra pass or two to be sure that I have a nice clean cut when I'm done. Now I repeat the process on my other molding, and then I get to glue the two together. I make sure I use my glue sparingly because I don't want a lot of squeeze out. That's going to be very hard to clean up, and if you don't get it all, it'll show in the finish. And the end result is a curved, complex molding that should fit my project perfectly. Now this is a small scale demonstration. We can apply these same techniques to big moldings as well, but that's a subject for another video. Be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always full of tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com. Happy molding!